And our presenter will be Kate Bosman, who is the Richmond MRC unit coordinator. I'm having a hard time with that. And Alyssa Lewis, she is a SME.
Okay, so my name is Kate Bosman. I'm the Medical Reserve Corps coordinator for Richmond City. I'm also a master trainer for the Revive program, which is Virginia's opioid overdose and naloxone education program. And so we're going to be talking about a little bit about the history of the Revive program, trying to understand addiction, but of course we could talk for days, weeks about addiction and really never understand it. But just to give everyone sort of a baseline where we're coming from, so we all start off on the same page. We're going to talk about how overdoses happen and how to reverse them, how the naloxone works, who might be at risk, more at risk for an overdose. My favorite part, which is talking about okay, something is happening and I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, I apologize for that. I'm not sure what's going on with the... Okay.
Just give it a minute here. And excuse everyone, we're having a storm here in the area. It's kind of affecting all of us.
All right, let me...
Thank you.
I apologize. We've practiced this and it worked fine. And of course. So I think we stopped at dispelling the myths around ways to reverse an overdose. There are many out there. Some are a little crazy. We'll talk about that. And then how to physically actually use the naloxone to reverse an overdose. So Revive started in 2015 and it began as a pilot project in Richmond City and also in the far southwest of Virginia, because those were the two locations that they were seeing the largest increase in overdoses. And in 2017, it was expanded statewide.
Quick smoking or not.
And they added a couple pieces of really important legislation, both of which were updated this year in July. So one of them is the Good Samaritan Law, and that protects folks who use naloxone in good faith on someone that they believe is having an opioid overdose. It basically is the same thing as when you give someone CPR, that you're protected from litigation if you are using the naloxone in good faith. And the change in July of this year, they also added, so initially it was anyone who had been trained and can prove that they had been trained to use the naloxone. And the change this year, they actually added to anyone could use the naloxone on someone and be protected. So they didn't necessarily have to carry that little I've been trained in Revive card to be able to have those protections. The other piece of legislation that was changed this year was the safe reporting of overdoses. And in this case, now both the person who uses the naloxone and the person who is overdosing is protected from arrest or prosecution for just a few things, though not a ton of different things. The unlawful purchase, possession, or consumption of alcohol, so like underage drinking, possession of a controlled substance, possession of marijuana or intoxication in public, or possession of paraphernalia. Up until July of this year, it only protected the person who was using the naloxone to reverse that overdose. And so the person who was experiencing the overdose was not protected. And also, prior to July of this year, it didn't protect the person from arrest but the person could only assert an affirmative defense. The change this year got rid of that, and now both folks are protected from arrest or prosecution just for those 5 charges. Now, if the evidence for the prosecution was found by other means, not because the person called 911 to help somebody with an overdose, but because maybe they were serving a warrant or something like that, then this protection does not cover that. So there's a standing order in Virginia for naloxone, and basically what that means is that we all, as residents of Virginia, have a prescription for naloxone that we can use at any time. We can go to the pharmacy and say, I would like to get some naloxone, and they will give it to you without a written prescription from a provider. Now, typically at like a CVS or a Walgreens or something like that, you would have to pay for it or use your insurance, but you can also obtain it from local health departments at no cost. Now, I will say that check with your local health department because each locality does it different. Richmond City, prior to COVID, would have regular days where you could come pick it up and regular days that we would have training. Yes, that's right. I saw in the chat. You may have to explain it to them. Unfortunately, not all pharmacy employees know about the standing order. Most do, which is great. So if you want to get it from the local health department at no cost, definitely check with your locality to figure out how they do it. And then also community service boards like Richmond Behavioral Health Authority also are able to give it out at no cost. Same thing with them. If you want to try to get it from them, you want to check to see how they are doing it as well. So I said, you know, we could really talk forever about addiction and all the different theories behind it. But what is really important to understand is that folks don't plan to get addicted to drugs. And addiction refers to a substance use disorders at the severe end of the spectrum, and it's characterized by a person's inability to control the impulse to use drugs, even when there are negative consequences. So there is a video that we're going to show. I think it's a really lovely sort of visual representation of addiction. So give me just a second and I will get that up for you. They are central nervous system depressants. They're a class of drug that include heroin, synthetic opioids like fentanyl, pain relievers that are legally available by prescription. So also, I will be asking questions, so you can just throw your answers up in the chat. What opioids have you heard of? What names, either street names, legal names, brand names, generic names? Anyone? Yep, Oxy. Yes, all of those. Percocet. No, crack is not. Dilaudid, Percocet, yes. Heroin. Yep. So here's just a list of a lot of the sort of more well-known. We have the generic, the trade, and then the street names. So why might it be important for you or really anyone to know these names? It's good to know what someone may taken, asking what the person took. Yep. So you know how to identify them. Exactly. Yep. I've also heard in past trainings, so you know what you've been prescribed. And I've heard some folks say, so I know what my kids are talking about, particularly about the street names. Now, granted, street names change a lot, and they also vary by region and location. So I would suggest Googling them. I don't know if you want to do that on your work computer, but if it's something that you want to know about what specifically the street names are in your location, you can do that. But it is a good to know, particularly if you're in a situation with strangers and you come upon somebody who you think is potentially overdosing, and they're with someone, and they can say, he took a bunch of T3s, and you can tell the 911 operator that you believe that it is an opioid overdose. So an overdose is essentially an overload of your system. So opioids fit into the receptors in our brain, and too many opioids on too many receptors slows the system down, eventually shutting it down completely. So who might be more at risk, or what circumstances might put somebody at risk to have an overdose, maybe over somebody else? Ooh, Alyssa, you want to grab these?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying mental illness, chronic use of pain medications, genetics, environmental factors, accidentally taking too many, your tolerance is lowered. I'm trying to read as fast as I can.
We're coming in fast.
Yeah, mental health, again, tolerance lower, chronic pain, they're recovering already, taking with other substances.
Yep. I think everybody's hit the ones that we really focus on. So prior overdose, we know that someone who is overdosed prior is at much higher risk to overdose again. And then reduced tolerance for whatever reason, whether it's someone who's stopped using because they're in recovery, they just decided to quit. Maybe they were taking prescribed medications and they stopped taking them. They were incarcerated. And then when they start using again, if they start using at the same level they were using prior to stopping, that's a huge risk for them to overdose. Mixing drugs, combining opioids with other drugs, particularly other depressants, is not a great idea. And also thinking about combining uppers and downers, stimulants and depressants do not cancel each other out, just gives you a much higher risk to overdose. Using alone, which is something that a lot of people don't think about, but if you're by yourself, then there's nobody there to help you. And then variations in strength or quantity, changing formulations. Maybe someone was on a prescribed short-acting opioid, and then they get changed to a long acting and they think, well, this isn't working. And so they take more than they probably should in that moment. Confusion about prescriptions. I've heard of folks who have been given a patch, a pain patch, and either forgot to take the first one off and put the other one on, and that led them to overdose, or they didn't understand the instructions. If you're using drugs illicitly, maybe you get it from somebody that you had never gotten it from before, or you're given something that you don't know exactly what it is. And then medical conditions such as lung disease, kidney or liver problems, or heart issues, or are all risks for overdose. So how can you tell the difference between somebody who's just high, I don't say just high, but who is high, or someone who's actually overdosing? Alyssa?
Yep. So looks like non-responsive. They're not breathing. Someone says sleepy. A lot of unresponsiveness.
Yeah.
Don't respond to outside stimulus. Respirations, faint to no pulse.
Yep.
Poor color. Someone says when they're high, they're groggy, but when they're overdose or when they've experienced an overdose, they're unresponsive. Skin is clammy and not breathing.
Yep. I think you guys hit them all.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody who's really high, they're going to be relaxed. Their speech might be slowed or slurred. They're sleepy looking. They have a semi-normal heart rate or pulse, normal skin tone, and they will have pinpoint pupils, but they will be responsive. So that's like the trigger, right? Am I going to use Narcan or am I not going to use Narcan? If they're responsive, you're not going to use the Narcan. If they're unresponsive, that's what tells you then now it's time to get the Narcan out. Also, if they're overdosed, their face might be pale or clammy. Depending on their skin tone, they might be blue or gray around the lips and fingertips. They might have a slow or no heart rate at all. And they might be making kind of a deep, snory, gurgly sound. Typically, because they call it the death rattle. It is definitely, you can tell something is wrong. It's not a cute little like, hey, wake up, I can't sleep because you're snoring. It's a desperate, definitely trying to breathe, snory sound. And I will say that I have heard from folks, a couple of police officers actually said that, we arrived on scene and this person had overdosed and their friend said, well, we just thought they were sleeping. So we didn't wake them up. And I would say to you that it is definitely worth making somebody mad, waking them up from a nap to check to make sure that they are actually gonna wake up. It's very important. This is my favorite part. Tell me all the ways that you've heard that you can reverse an opioid overdose.
Ice bath, coffee, cold water, cold showers, putting them in a cold shower, Tabasco, induced vomiting, slapping their face, a couple of people saying Narcan, smelling salts, 5-hour energy.
That's a new one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are basically a list of all the things that we would like you not to do. So putting them in a bath, they could drown, definitely. You don't want to induce vomiting or give them something to drink. They could choke or aspirate. Don't put them in the ice. This is the ice, particularly like in the armpits and other areas, is the one that we hear the most. And that is actually going to slow their system down even more. So that is not a good idea. You don't want to hit them, kick them, punch them, slap them, no dropping them from a great height. You just, if you try to wake them up, you want to shake them gently. And we also hear a lot of like milk, injecting milk or making them drink milk, which is also not a great idea. So none of these things work. And why don't these things work? We just learned about it. Yes, exactly. So they don't work on the receptors. Exactly right. Naloxone is the only thing that does. So it is designed to rapidly reverse opioid overdose. It's actually been around since the 60s and used in hospitals. Only recently, though, approved for lay use. And what naloxone does is it takes those opioids, kicks them out of the receptors, and attaches itself. So then the opiates cannot reattach. Now, it doesn't dissolve them. So they're still around there, in the system. So when the Narcan wears off, there is a very real possibility that they can reattach and the person goes back into overdose. So that's something we'll talk about in a second. So there's different ways to introduce Narcan and naloxone in the system. So Narcan, naloxone, same thing. Narcan is a brand name. So Narcan nasal spray is a simple, just nasal spray, essentially. Comes two doses in a box. There's also an auto injector, much like an EpiPen. And then there's also injectable, where you would actually draw it up and use a syringe. All of the health districts dispense name brand Narcan. So you want to store it in room temperature, so not in the car for a long period of time, not in the fridge or anything like that. But there has been a recent study that it is shown that it's more stable at temperature fluctuations than we originally thought. But you still don't want to keep it in your glove box, especially in weather like we've been having recently. Short periods is fine. If it's expired, absolutely still use it. It is completely non-habit forming. It's not dangerous at all. All it does is work on the receptors. So it's absolutely better to use it if you have some expired than not use it at all. It's completely safe. It's the same dose for a baby, an adult, small adult, large adult. They've used it on canine officers. So drug dogs that have gotten exposed, they've actually used it on them before. There's no abuse potential. It won't work on anything but opioids. So it won't work on alcohol, benzos, cocaine, meth, anything like that. So now we're going to really start talking about how to actually use the Narcan to reverse an overdose. It's very simple. It's 5 steps. You check for responsiveness, you call 911, you give 2 rescue breaths, you administer naloxone, and then you continue rescue breathing. So to check for responsiveness, you want to try to stimulate them gently, right? We're not going to punch them or anything. So you can shout their name, you can tap their shoulder, you can make a fist and take your knuckles and rub it along their sternum. That is very uncomfortable. If they are wake-upable, that is going to wake them up. You can check for breathing. You can put your ear to the person's nose to see if they're breathing. You can look to see if their chest is rising. If you do not get any response at all, then you're going to proceed to calling 911. If you're by yourself, you can dial the number, put the phone on speaker, set it down, and keep moving. If you're with somebody, you want to designate a person. You call 911. Don't just kind of shout out, hey, somebody call 911, because then everybody's going to think everybody else is going to do that. We learned that in CPR class, right? Explain to them where you are, make it easy to find you. Explain to them that you think that the person is having an opioid overdose. If the person is not having an opioid overdose, giving them the Narcan is not going to hurt them. If you have to leave them, you want to put them in the recovery position, which is hands up under the head, the knee bent, braced on the ground. That way they don't roll forward, they don't roll backwards, only if you have to leave them, though. Like to go open the door for the EMTs or something like that. Step 3 is give them 2 rescue breaths. If you receive Narcan from the health department, you will also be given 2 pretty large CPR shields that will cover the whole face. They have a one-way valve in them. I understand that in the time of COVID, folks may be uncomfortable with that. The important thing is to get the Narcan in them. To give the rescue breaths, you want to pinch their nose, tilt the head back, 2 breaths into that valve. Regardless of what position you found them in, you want to get them flat on their back to go through the steps. Then you're going to administer the naloxone, and I'm going to show you a video in a minute about how to use the actual Narcan. For Narcan, you want to tilt the head back, put the dispenser all the way up into their nostril until your fingers are touching their nose, and then just depress the plunger once. That picture is exactly what it looks like when it's ready to be deployed. And then you want to go back to that rescue breathing if the person hasn't recovered. You can do full CPR if you are CPR certified. What you don't ever want to do is just hands only. So it's either just breathing or full CPR. And it's 1 breath every 5 seconds for a couple minutes. And then you're going to reassess the situation. Have they started responding? What's happening? There are 2 situations where you may have to use that second dose in the box. The first one is the person has not responded within that first couple of minutes. It can work between 30 and 45 seconds, but you want to give it 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure that it is actually going to work. If it has not worked, then you are going to give them the second dose. If you can remember, you want to put it in the opposite nostril. It's not terrible if you forget, but you definitely want to try to remember. Okay. The second situation, which we kind of briefly talked about earlier, is if the person recovers after the first dose and then the Narcan wears off and then they go back into overdose. So the naloxone will work for about 30 or 45 minutes. This is 30 to 90. But once it wears off, if there's enough opiates still in the system, then they can go back into overdose. So if that happens, you want to do those same steps again. Do a couple rescue breaths, give them the second dose, go back to breathing. If you have to call 911 again, maybe you're out in the country and the EMTs haven't even gotten there yet, or the person refused medical care. They refuse to go to the hospital. There are situations where folks will choose to not call 911. And if that happens, if that's ever a situation that you're in or hear about, then someone needs to make the commitment to stay with the person who is in overdose for at least 3 hours. So after they've recovered, you want to keep them calm, try not to let them leave, try not to let them eat, go do more drugs, explain to them what happened. Try to keep them as calm as possible. They may not be feeling great. You may have heard folks say, well, I was with somebody and they overdosed and we gave them Narcan and they felt, they threw up everywhere and they felt terrible. I heard Narcan makes you throw up or Narcan makes you sick. That's not the Narcan itself doing it. It's the lack of the opioids has put that person into withdrawal. This is also not the time, if it's somebody that this is not the time when they've recovered to go into a long talk about, you need to get yourself together and you need to get into recovery, and that this is not the time or place for that. You just want to keep them calm and keep them well. So, unfortunately, we can't physically all do this together. But I am going to show the Adapt Pharma video that goes into pretty good detail about how to physically use the Narcan. Just give me 1 second.
Like Percocet or Oxycontin, or illegal opioids like heroin, then you should know about the risk of an accidental, life-threatening opioid overdose. In fact, over 56% of overdoses happen in private homes beyond the immediate reach of doctors and nurses. There's a way for you to help someone who is experiencing an opioid overdose, even if you don't have specialized medical training. In this video are instructions for use, as well as the uses and safety information you should know for using Narcan. But first, it's important to be able to recognize the signs of an overdose. Signs of an opioid overdose include not waking up or responding to your voice or touch, breathing that is very slow, irregular, or has even stopped. The dark center part of the eyes becomes very small, sometimes called pinpoint pupils. Fingernails and lips turn blue or purple. A slow heartbeat, weak pulse, or low blood pressure. If someone has these signs, here's how you can help. Narcan nasal spray is a medicine that reverses the effects of an opioid overdose. Narcan nasal spray is not a substitute for emergency medical care. Repeated doses may be necessary. As with any drug, you need to be aware of important safety information about its use. Please pay particular attention to the indications and important safety information at the end of this video. Also, please see the accompanying full prescribing information in the use of this product. Narcan nasal spray was designed for use wherever an emergency opioid overdose happens. Because it doesn't require specialized medical training, it can be given to someone by following these instructions. First, lay the person on their back. Then, remove the device from the box and peel back the package. Hold the device with your thumb on the bottom of the plunger and 2 fingers on either side of the nozzle. Tilt the person's head back and provide support under their neck with your hand. Place and hold the tip of the nozzle in one nostril until your fingers touch the bottom of their nose. Press the plunger firmly to give the dose into the person's nose. After giving the dose, remove the device from the person's nostril and move them on their side, positioning their hands under their head. Call 911 and get emergency medical help right away after giving the first dose of Narcan nasal spray, even if the person wakes up. Narcan is not a substitute for emergency medical care. Keep the person under observation. If the person doesn't respond by waking up to voice or touch or breathing normally after 2 to 3 minutes, administer the second dose provided in the box in the alternate nostril. If they respond and the signs of an opioid emergency have returned after Narcan nasal spray is given, then give another dose in the alternate nostril using a new device and watch them closely until emergency help is received. Additional doses may be given every 2 to 3 minutes until they respond or emergency medical help is received. After using Narcan nasal spray, put the device in its box and then dispose in a place safe from children.